Do you know someone maybe who's been sick? Maybe you quietly question if they're actually really sick sometimes. They seem to be sick all the time. Maybe sometimes we think it's in their head, or even if it's maybe just to get attention. You might even wonder, hey, what did they do to cause this? Or even, do they even deserve it? See, it's easy for us to be opinionated when it comes to someone else's health. But when we're on the other side, we want that grace and we want that mercy. We want all those prayers because we are the ones battling through these things. All of a sudden, our opinions, they quickly change. All of a sudden, instead of judgment, you have sympathy. Instead of suspicion, you have concern. When you've been there, when you've suffered a long-term illness, or when the doctors really just have no answer, you see things completely different. See, in this series, we've been answering questions about healing. So today, we get to discuss one that's not easily discussed, or even very often discussed, especially in the church, because a lot of times people don't really know how to deal with long-term illness. And so the question today is, how can I help and support someone through healing or even a lack of healing? Maybe another question is, maybe you've been sick for years and the doctors, well, they don't know why. And you're asking yourselves, is there any hope for me? Maybe you or a family member has a disease for which there is no cure. You're facing a difficult prognosis, and the doctor said that this will always be part of your life. Maybe you have a chronic condition that causes daily pain or even discomfort, and you do your best to live with it because you can't forget about it. It's because it's always there. Maybe you deal with depression, anxiety, or another type of condition. You've tried everything, but really nothing works. You're tired, you're frustrated, and you're even discouraged. Others of you, maybe you have a sickness, a disease, or pain, but just can't find the cause. And it's maddening. All you have is questions, but really you don't have any answers. Maybe you're watching online and you feel hopeless, and discouraged, and even alone. Others of you probably aren't going to immediately identify. Maybe you're not really going through something and you feel blessed and healthy and wealthy and all of those things, and that's good that you've never faced those things and that you have hope and that you maybe never will. But I still want you to tune in and listen, because really for several different reasons. Number one, there may be someone in your family or your circle of friends facing these challenges. So you need to better understand how to love them, how to encourage them, how to pray for them. One day, you or maybe someone that you love might find yourself in this situation. What we're going to learn about today will be valuable in the future. God will give you opportunities to share your faith, to pray for people without answers. And I want you to understand and be ready to fulfill His purpose. And then lastly, we're a family. We're a family of God, and Paul in Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 told us this: carry each other's burdens. Romans 12, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. So we aren't supposed to let anyone in our family face a challenge alone, because we are better, we are stronger when we're together, because everything is better in teams. So the story today we look at is in Mark chapter 5. People heard about Jesus, His teachings, His miracles. They came to see Him, they came to hear Him, and they wanted their needs met. And in Matthew chapter 5, verse 22, we find a guy by the name of Jairus. He was one of the synagogue rulers. Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at His feet, and he pleaded earnestly with Him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. See, Jairus is a synagogue leader, and you may say, well, what does that even matter? He's one of the people who opposed Jesus and His teachings. So if the other guys heard that Jairus begging Jesus for help, well, he'd lose his position, he'd lose his status. But guess what? Jairus decided, well, I needed to go to someone who could heal, and that was Jesus. Because he only cared about one thing, the life of his precious little girl. See, Jesus didn't hesitate. He had come to bless and to love everybody, even His enemies. So in verse 24 it says, "So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed around him." So it was a borderline mob scene at this point. Jairus, Jesus, and the disciples, they could barely move through the people. No one wanted to miss the action of what was going to happen. They headed to Jairus' home, and they're pushing their way through the crushing, the clamoring crowd of people. And then the unthinkable happened. At the worst possible time for Jairus, Jesus was interrupted by a woman who had a desperate need. In verse 25, it says, "A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. 12 years. 12 years is a long time. You know, a lot can happen in 12 years. 12 years ago, the Dallas Mavericks won the National NBA Championship. How awesome was that? I remember I even bought the t-shirt. We were so excited. We were living in Dallas at the time. We were so excited. We were excited that Dirk Nowitzki finally won his championship. 12 years ago, no one ever heard of COVID. 12 years ago, Razorback fans, the Razorbacks went to the Sugar Bowl under Bobby Petrino, and they went 11-2. It was a record that year. How many guys were like, let's go back to 12 years ago. Let's go 11-2. Let's go, right? Yeah. Well, the planking craze was a big deal 12 years ago. Do you remember that? You guys remember the planking? And everyone planking, doing their planking thing and doing it in weird things like that. I mean, I don't know. Did anyone plank anything and decide to do that? I don't think I could have done that if I tried. Well, 12 years ago, we didn't know what the fox said. So 12 years ago, we didn't know what he said, but now we do. 12 years ago, One Direction was still going in one direction. Now it seems they're in a lot of different directions. But 12 years ago seems like a lifetime. For 12 years, this woman has been losing blood. An abnormal female cycle that lasted 4,380 days. It was hard for her to remember when she was sick, when she wasn't sick, weak or even exhausted. Verse 26, it said, she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So every day, every week, and every month of every year, for 12 years, she continued to suffer. Every new cure she tried, and she got worse than she was before. She had no hope. And so when she struggled for a long time, you hear a lot of frustrating, maybe irritating, maybe occasionally stupid suggestions from encouragers that say, I'm here to encourage you. People say things that aren't helpful in any way. The worst words are when they say, well, at least. Well, at least it's not terminal, right? At least you have insurance. At least your kids are grown. And if you're talking with someone who's going through a difficult time, we should just leave our at least statements out of the conversation. Let's quit trying to silver line someone else's cloud. Sometimes clouds are just clouds. To make even worse, in those days, people believed that this woman's condition was a result of her sin. And so there was nothing more discouraging than to be told your sickness is God's punishment. And there are people that still believe that today. That when bad things happen, it's because of their sin. They tell you things like that. If you had even more faith, you wouldn't be sick. Those people quickly change their theology when they get sick. And one of the most painful consequences of her illness was this, the inability to be around people. She was considered unclean, and she was disqualified from participating in community or church life. If she touched anyone, they became unclean. She couldn't go to the temple. She couldn't even be around other women in her neighborhood. She was not only sick, she was very lonely. But she heard the rumors of Jesus. Jesus had touched an unclean leper and made him clean. So instantly he was healed. And so it's an amazing story. And after all, the woman has been through the humiliation, the pain, and the countless failed cures. She couldn't bring herself to what was true. Especially the part about Jesus. He touched an unclean leper. Nobody touched a leper in those days. But what if it was true? What if his touch could actually heal her? Just that quickly. And even just that simply. Maybe hope began to flicker a little bit again in her heart. Then one day, Jesus comes to her town. The woman watched the scene as they had many others for the last 12 years. From the outside looking in, she wanted to be near to Jesus, but it just wasn't going to be easy. She wanted to be close. But guess what? People would recognize her if she went through the crowd, and they would kick her out. So finally, she decided, well, what does it even matter? I'm already miserable. I'm already alone. So suddenly she realized that she believed. Hope had to surge through her heart, and lowering her head with much difficulty, she probably began to push her way through the crowd just to get to Jesus. Finally, she's close. As she's pushing through the crowd, he merely touched the leper, she probably told herself. And the leper was made clean. And so in verse 27, it says this: she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. With her last bit of strength, she crouched, leaned forward, and her fingers brushed the hem of his garment. And then suddenly, she knew something had happened. Just in that moment, she knew something had happened, and so did Jesus. Because in verse 29, it says, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. The blood was no longer flowing, but she was cured, instantly healed by the power of God. Jesus stopped walking through the crowd and just was like, whoa, well, something happened. Verse 30 says, he turned around in the crowd and asked kind of a silly question. He asked, well, who touched me? I mean, think about it. Everyone is touching you, Jesus. Everybody. But this touch wasn't like the others. The woman's heart began to beat rapidly. She knew that she was the one, probably quaking in fear. She fell before Jesus, and he told him the whole truth about herself and what she had done before. And Jesus listened quietly. When she finished speaking, the words settled in her spirit. And this is what he said. He said to her, Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And the exchange between Jesus and the woman was over. That quickly, that simply. She had been healed of her disease, and she was pronounced clean. She wasn't sure which meant more to her, the healing of her body or the healing that took place in her heart. Because both would remain with her forever. She would never stop believing that Jesus could heal every illness, every disease, and every wounded heart that quickly and that simply. I believe she did two things probably. First, she probably went to the temple for the first time in 12 years. And she probably touched people and hugged people. You know what it felt like? Like when we came back from COVID, it was like, hey, can I hug you? Can I high five you? In that weird thing. And there was a couple of times where I forgot the protocols, and I was just so excited to see people that I just gave them a big hug. And I'm probably sure they didn't like it at first, but I just couldn't help it because I was so excited. And so I can kind of relate a little bit. She probably started hugging people and touching people and saying, look, I can be around you guys. I can go to the temple. I can hang out with you because I have been cleaned. I've been healed. She'd been touched by Jesus, and she would never be the same. And so when we look at these things and we look at this and there's a difference between sympathy and empathy, right? See, sympathy is I feel compassion towards you, and I think when people are going through stuff, we have sympathy for them. But empathy is when I know what you're going through, I understand your feelings. You know, sometimes when we're going through things, I may not understand because I haven't gone through that. But there's people who have gone through it, and they have the empathy. They know what it's like. They understand their feelings. So when you feel empathy, when you have been there, and sympathy when you haven't, you have sympathy for people who were sick. And when you go through the same thing, you have empathy for people with no answers. You listen differently, you respond differently, and you pray differently. And here's how you can talk to and express care for someone who's going through a long-term battle. Number one, you can first pray for them. Maybe during worship, just walk over to them, put a hand on their shoulder and pray. Every time they stand or come for prayer, just come with them, pray with them. Pray out loud so that they can hear you praying for them. God will speak to you through your prayer. I know sometimes you're like, well, I don't know what to say. It's okay. Let God speak to you, and maybe it's just, Lord, heal them, and that's okay. See, your prayers are encouraging. It's kind of like an encouraging note that you're going to get. You're just going to get it in a spiritual form. The second way to help them is to tell them, I'm praying for you. Send them a note, send them an email, a Facebook message, a text message, a card. See, God uses simple reminders to remind your friend that they're not alone. Throughout sickness or anything else, we can help people to know that they are still cared for. The third thing is to express your love. You can hug them. Tell them I love you. Don't treat them like they have a disease, and if they're depressed or with undiagnosed illness, like they're unclean. Don't be like, oh, we gotta stay away from that because I don't want. No, just express your love to them. Fourth, remember this: the family of the person with a long-term illness, because they're still in the fight. See, it's incredibly discouraging, and it zaps their energy, their physically, mentally, and emotionally, when the same thing you say to the sick person, you just say to them, because they're going through it as well. If you're in that situation where you're caring for someone, I want you to know that we love you. We don't always know what to say, but we are with you. We're not only praying for your family member, we're praying for you as well. So here's a list of what not to do. Number one, don't use humor to encourage. This is not a strong suit for Greg, so this is convicting me right here because I get sometimes uncomfortable with serious, okay? I'm working through it. But sometimes what we do is we use humor when people are facing long-term illnesses. And what we got to understand is it's not funny, and funny isn't what we should be going for. Anytime your idea of humor is to make fun of someone's, maybe it's a physical appearance or condition, well, you're not helping them, you're just hurting them. And I remember in the most difficult time of one of my ministry areas, we had a kid several years ago when we were in Illinois who took his own life. And I was the first one at the hospital. And I'll just be honest with you guys. I didn't say a word because I couldn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. And the only thing I could do was just sit there in silence as they're processing everything that they're going through right now. And we prayed together. And that's all I could do. But guess what? In those moments, we don't have to say anything. It's the presence that we're there. And when they have questions, we can try to answer their questions, but we can pray for them in those times. And so here's another thing that we shouldn't say. Let me know if there's anything I can help you with. Now, you can say that, but you got to mean it then. So like in the middle of the workday, if they're like, hey, I need your help, I guess you'd be clocking out and going to help them. But what we got to do is Don't constantly ask them how they're doing. Don't pretend to be a medical expert. Don't go on WebMD and look up their diagnosis. And I mean, it's going to spiral you out of control anyway. Don't tell them, don't Google their symptoms and offer your diagnosis. Don't offer solutions that benefit you. Don't try to sell them products of your miracle cures, your little scents and sage and all that crazy stuff. I don't know. Sorry, my sister, if you're watching, sorry about that. But don't tell them anything. Tell them about everyone who died, that same thing. The only thing I can equate that to is when Rachel was pregnant, people go, let me tell you how bad our pregnancy was. And I'm like, why? Why? People do that, and I'm like, that's weird. Like, well, we had trouble with this. I'm like, okay, get thee behind me. That's what I tell people. So let's get back to Jairus' story. Let's get back to his story. Because he's interrupted by this woman. And in verse 35 it says, while Jesus was speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, they said. So why bother with the teacher anymore? Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. Jairus led Jesus to his home, and when they arrived, they heard the wailing of mourners, and Jesus silently repeated, or Jairus probably silently repeated to Jesus, wow, just believe. Just believe. Jairus wanted to believe, but the wailing and the mourners told him there was no hope. His daughter was dead. Jairus' wife stood in the doorway. Her face was pale and her eyes were red from crying. She went in, and Jesus went into the house along with Peter, James, and John, Jairus and his wife. There was weeping and wailing, and Jesus asked once again, he says, what is all the commotion? What's all the wailing about? Kind of a strange question to ask when you're mourning the death of your daughter. And the mourners were all shocked. They forgot to mourn in a house filled with sorrow. The mourners, well, they laughed. They laughed at him. They thought Jesus was a fool. And Jesus said, well, she's not dead. The child's just asleep. But what is he thinking? How can he do that? Why does he say that? So what does Jesus do? He kicks them all out of the house. So there's no one in the house but Jesus, Jairus, and his wife. And of course, a 12-year-old girl who was merely asleep. See, Jesus was led into the room where the child lay. She appeared peaceful, she appeared beautiful, and if she were sweetly dreaming, but her chest didn't rise, no sound was heard. No one stirred. Jesus knelt down by her bedside, knelt down to her tiny little hands, and he said to her, little girl, I say to you, get up. And guess what? The girl got up. And then she walked around. Could you imagine the scene at that point? Like we go from mourning to now dancing and celebrating, hugging and being excited. Hey, my daughter was supposed to be dead, but now she's still very much alive. The mother and the father had to fall to their knees praising God and thanking Jesus. They hugged their daughter. They cried with tears of joy. It was a beautiful reunion. One every parent can identify with. Jairus no longer had doubts about Jesus. No doubt, Jairus and his entire family, they accepted Jesus and became lifelong followers of Jesus. At that point, it probably didn't matter about his status or where he was at in life. It was, hey, I want to follow this man who just healed my daughter. So this morning, if you're in a battle, in a long-term battle, here's what you can learn from this story. Number one, don't let anything keep you from Jesus. Don't let anything keep you from Jesus. And I know, you may say, but Greg, you don't know how long I've been going through this. And I get it. I get it. It's hard to continue to go up, to continue to go up, to continue to go up and go, man, I don't know if anything is ever going to happen. But guess what? Something will happen. Don't let anything keep you from Jesus. The woman, she overcame her shame, her disappointment, her discouragement, and the disapproval of others. She came and ran to Jesus. So don't let anything keep you from Jesus. I know you have your doubts, but guess what? So did Jairus have his doubts. So did the woman who's been sick for 12 years. So don't let your doubts keep you from Jesus. When you're struggling with doubt, when you're struggling with wonder, if there's aren't even sure, still in control. And you can trust him. I remember growing up, for years we prayed for my mom. So my mom, she had leg and ago. So she had this surgery. A thing happened. So we do this. Even done. Four. And you go, God, doctor, aligning the doctor for surgery. You get it? But guess even before the right time. And so I want to tell you, it doesn't matter how long you've been. I want you to continue to push forward. I want you to know that God still has a plan for you. Don't let anything keep you from Jesus. Don't be worried about what other people are going to think. Won't people why you haven't been healed? Well, they may, but guess what? It's okay. Just keep coming forward. Keep pushing forward. Don't let others keep you from Jesus. What would have happened if the woman who's been with the issue of blood for 12 years didn't go to Jesus, thought, well, it's just another hope, another idea. Maybe it's just me in my head thinking I should do this. She would never have been healed. But it took her pushing through the thing. And here's the other thing is this: God has not forgotten about you. He knows right where you're at and precisely what you need. So today might be your day. So here's the final lesson: is this one touch from Jesus changes everything. One touch from Jesus changes everything. A 12-year illness was instantly healed. A dead daughter was brought back to life. All it took was one touch from Jesus. So this morning, I got news for you. It doesn't matter how long you've been struggling with. It doesn't matter what the doctor's report says. One touch from Jesus changes everything.